Hi everybody, we wanted to try something a little bit different. There are 88 constellations in the night sky, 48 of which are Greek in origin, and are named after various Greek myths that we see in the world of Percy Jackson. So this series of Constellation Chronicles is going to go over the history of not just the stories that inspired some of the coolest constellations in the night sky, but how they got their names, as well as some other cool astronomy facts and tidbits. At the end of the video, there's going to be a breakdown of our sources and sites so you can see where we got all of our information, and we also have multiple links down in the description if you want to read up on them for yourself. So we hope you enjoy, and if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, be sure to let us know, and we'd love to cover more. But today we're going to start with the constellation Aries, which, contrary to popular belief, was not actually named after a Greek god. In fact, the background of the Aries myth goes back to the story of Phrixus and Helle, twin children of the god Themis, who were sired out of an affair that Themis had with a minor goddess named Nephele. King Themis, however, was married at the time, and the arrival of the twins scorned their stepmother Ino, who wanted to get rid of the children by any means necessary. There are a few conflicting versions of this story, some of which claim that Nephele and Themis were together first, and that the children were already born when Themis married Ino, but some others claim that it was an extramarital affair. We'll leave it to you to pick which one that you may prefer, but for those of you familiar with Greek culture, you'll know that murder, and especially the murder of family members, was a huge taboo, and almost certainly reserved you a spot in the fields of punishment for when you died. This is why there's so many stories of Greek figures finding roundabout ways to kill family members or unwanted children, sometimes by leaving them out in the wild in the case of Atalanta, setting them floating down the river in the case of Oedipus, or any number of indirect means. Ino was no exception, though her plan was a bit more convoluted than simply abandoning the children. Instead, she roasted the seeds of nearby farmers so when they planted their crop for the upcoming season, nothing grew, making the people of Boeotia very concerned. So, they issued a voyage and sent messengers to the island of Delphi, where they would consult the oracle in hopes that an answer would reveal itself. But Ino was one step ahead. She met with the messengers in private and offered them a bribe. When they got back, no matter what the oracle said, they were to report that the prince and the princess must be sacrificed, and only then would the crops continue to grow again, which technically was true. So when the messengers returned, they did as Ino instructed, and no one actually knows what was truly said by the oracle that day. So the people of Boeotia agreed to obey the will of God, and the prince and the princess were scheduled to be sacrificed. Their mother, however, was not happy that the queen had manipulated the kingdom into killing her children, so she sent help. From the skies descended a golden ram that was sent to catch the children as they fell into the sea below, and it was Nephele's hope that the ram would cart them off to a distant kingdom where they could live free of their stepmother's cruelty. When the ram flew into the sky, Helle made the fatal mistake of looking below her, and in her disorientation she lost her balance and fell. But Phrixus was able to make it all the way to Colchis on the back of the ram. It is said that Hellespont, a region of the Dardanelles Strait just off the coast of Turkey, was the location where Helle drowned, and that it was subsequently named in her honor. When Phrixus finally arrived in Colchis, however, he was granted asylum by King Aries, and even ended up marrying the princess Calliope. Phrixus, however, didn't have the full story about who saved him, so he decided to honor Zeus by sacrificing the ram on the altar of King Aries. The golden fleece, however, was given to the king as a gratitude for helping Phrixus gain his freedom, and the fleece hung in the garden of Colchis to be ever guarded by an unsleeping dragon. For years, the fleece nourished the kingdom, allowing crops and livestock to thrive. But the ram itself was honored by Zeus, and he was immortalized in the constellation that today is known as Aries, the Latin word for ram. Later, we know that the Argonauts sailed in search of the fleece, and there's an entire story regarding Jason and his original voyage, but the actual ram was etched into the sky. The constellation itself is only made up of 6 stars, none of which are particularly bright. The brightest of the 6 is Hamal, which only has an apparent magnitude of 2.0. As a brief rundown, apparent magnitude is a measure of how bright an object is in the sky in reference to an observer on Earth, which includes not just visible light, but how much of other wavelengths we can measure. The lower the scale, the brighter the object. The full moon, for an example, is a -11. And an example of a 0 would be something like Vega, which is certainly bright, until we compare it to the brightest star in the sky, Sirius, which is a -1.44. The Andromeda Galaxy, which is notoriously hazy and barely visible to the naked eye, has an apparent magnitude of 3.44, just for reference. Aries is the second smallest of the 12 zodiac signs, with only Capricorn taking up less space in the night sky. In evenings in the north, Aries can be easily found by following the square of Pegasus, and specifically the top left star Alpheratz. Alpheratz forms a line of 3 stars that links itself, Merak, and Almag. And if you follow Merak directly down, you'll find Hamal, the brightest star in the Aries constellation. What's so interesting with the zodiac constellations is that the Earth precesses, which basically means that it wobbles ever so slightly like a spinning top. This means that the orientation of Earth drifts ever so slightly, shifting the zodiac a bit by bit every year. After 2,000 years, we've accumulated an additional 30 days or so, but the zodiac calendar hasn't been adjusted accordingly. So even though Aries begins in March, it's best viewed in January from the northern hemisphere. And we're not technically entering Aries if we follow how much it's drifted over the centuries. So, wanted to give you guys a little bit of a behind the scenes thing real fast. We are starting to work on a series of deep dives about myths behind the constellations that we see every night. We wanted to take a moment to talk about how we're going to be sourcing all this information, and I at least love the history part of what's going on behind finding the variations behind all of this myths. We're going to be using 4 main sources to cite, and they're going to be cited in all the video descriptions below, and for all of the subsequent videos. But we want to be really transparent about where we're getting this information, and we want to be able to give credit to those who have been able to put in the work that made these sources so readily available to us. So the first of our main sources is De Astronomia, or De Astronomia by Hyginus. Ancient Greece. His authorship is kind of debated, but we don't know enough about like the nuanced discourse going around that to be able to say specifically. It's all ancient Greece, so nobody's really sure who wrote all of what. But De Astronomia translates to concerning astronomy. It's this book that just goes over all of the constellations that were around in ancient Greece that were named at the time and the myths behind them. They're really short blurbs and paragraphs. They actually even talk about, where the stars are in these constellations that are available at the time. And, how, this star is the hand, and, there's 3 stars on the belt of Orion, that kind of thing. Obviously, all of these are ancient Greek, and I don't read that. My writer, Devin, also doesn't read that. So we're relying on a lot of translations for these. And we've got 2 different translations for De Astronomia. The first is going to be by Dr. Mary Grant. She was an associate professor of Latin and Greek studies at the University of Kansas. She worked for the University of Kansas from 1921, and she retired in 1960. She was actually inducted into the KU Women's Hall of Fame in 1975. She's got a lot of works that go into Greek myth. We actually use her translations of another source as well. But the second translation that we're using of De Astronomia is by Dr. Theoni Kondos. Hers is Star Myths of the Greek and Romans, a source book containing the constellations Pseudo-Eratosthenes and the poetic astronomy of Hyginus. Her last professorship position was at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she received both her master's and her PhD in classics from the University of Southern California. She unfortunately passed in 2012. She is our most modern translator that we've got. But we also use her to actually, that same book, the Star Myths of Greek and Romans, a source book containing the constellations of Pseudo-Eratosthenes and the poetic astronomy of Hyginus. That same book also has the translation that we're going to be using of Katasterismi, which roughly translates to constellations or placing among the stars. That's the one that's going to be by the Pseudo-Eratosthenes. He's like the original ancient Greek guy. The reason he's pseudo is because the original work is the Katasterismi. It's a lost work, so we don't have that original text. And that was by Eratosthenes of Cyrene. So what we actually have is a summarization work. So again, it's really short paragraphs, bare bones of these myths. And that summary work is what is being cited to Pseudo-Eratosthenes. Yeah, these works are really brief. Almost, we know that the one is a summarization of the work, but even the De Astronomia by Hyginus is very short paragraphs of stuff. And they're just really brief overviews with just a few bullet points. So if we wanted to do a little bit more deep dive, we found a work also by Dr. Mary Grant, translated by Dr. Mary Grant, also by Hyginus, called Fabulae, or Fables. We also had the problem with this one, though, of he really likes to be concise, and so it gives more additional details than just De Astronomia does, and fills in a couple of the blanks, but some things it leaves out that are in De Astronomia, and some things it adds, and so we really just want to make this as well-rounded as possible, so we have our 4th main source. It's called Biblioteca. I say it like the Spanish pronunciation. It's not. It is Greek, but it does also translate to the library. So if you guys ever took so Spanish in elementary school, that kind of thing. You learn biblioteca. It's the library. Since that is also in ancient Greek, we are relying on another translation. This one is by Sir James George Frazer. He was a Scottish social anthropologist who studied at the University of Glasgow and Trinity College in Cambridge. He has a lot of other work outside of the Greek mythology field. Based on the basic overview I was reading of his works, this is one of the few that are actually Greek. He did a lot of Hebrew mythology. And so those are 4 main sources we're going to be using throughout this series. Of course, there's going to be others, sources that we're using, but we really wanted to make sure that we pointed out those 4 actual ancient Greek sources, as well as their translations and their translators. We owe a lot of kudos and thanks to the people who laid the groundwork and did these translations for us. Sir Frazer was back in the late 1800s, early 1900s when he did his work. Dr. Mary Grant was from 1921 to 1960, and Dr. Condos was working from, I believe, the late 1900s up until her passing in 2012. Those 3 scholars really laid the groundwork for us. All of their translations are going to be linked below, and if you're wanting to look into them, Bibliotheca and Fabulae are really good for just a general Greek myth deep dive, because, Fables or Fabulae has, those brief synopses of the myths. Bibliotheca has that more deep dive. And actually, the link we're sending out for Bibliotheca has a search function. You can search any Greek myth, and it'll give you the breakdown of Apollodorus's, which I don't recall if I said, the Library of Bibliotheca is by Apollodorus. That work, that translation of that work, you can search through in its own website. The works by Dr. Grant, we're also linking below. Those are the Tapas texts, which is by the Eckardt Lescadeiros Foundation. And those are all public domain now, so they've just got that reposted to their website. But then De Astronomia and Catarismi, those specifically go into the myths of the constellations. So they're not going to have things that aren't in the constellations. But of course, there's going to be, like I said, variations on our sources for each video. We might have some other sources that we pull from that we want to cite, but those 4 are how we are synthesizing the tales and the myths to tell back to you guys. We would love to hear from you guys if there's any specific myths that you want to hear about first. And we really hope you guys enjoy this upcoming series. I will probably end up starting with zodiac signs, because everybody likes those and everybody kind of knows what those are by hearing just their name, and then probably start going more. I like to go alphabetically, so I kind of want to start with Andromeda, but we really hope you guys enjoy it. If you have any specific myths you want us to cover first, like I said, I'm planning on pretty much just going down alphabetically after the zodiac. But be sure to let us know in the comments. Thank you very much and have a good one.